All right, well, good morning, folks. This is Celeste Carmichael. I want to welcome you to our first Campus County Connection webinar of this season. And I'm here today with Keith Tidball, and he's going to be covering some really relevant topics as we talk about Eden and bringing it to the next level. So I'm not going to spend too much time in an introduction. Most of you folks have been on Zoom webinars before. If you haven't, welcome. I just want to encourage you to open the chat box to include some questions and introduce yourselves so we know who's on. This is a webinar in Zoom, which means that for the most part, in order to interact, you need to add to the chat box. So I do want to encourage you to do that so we can cover questions and make this as relevant to you as possible. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Keith.
Thank you very much, Celeste. Hello, everyone. Good morning. It's great to be with you this morning. As Celeste said, this is a very timely subject to be talking about today, given the recent hurricane in Texas and Louisiana, and also Irma, which is bearing down on the Caribbean and may hit Florida here before the end of the week. And of course, we're just at the beginning of hurricane season, so preparedness and what extension disaster education is all about should be on everybody's mind. I would like to reiterate what Celeste said. I'm very interested in knowing what counties are present today. So if you could add your name and which county you're from in the chat box, that'd be great as we move forward. Most of you have at least heard or been introduced to Eden, the Extension Disaster Education Network, and sort of the wave top version of what it is, the Eden 101, if you will. And if you haven't, you can find Eden 101 in a number of presentations introducing it as an extension offering here on the New York Eden website. Today is functionally Eden 201. This is beyond the introductions. This is taking it to the next level, especially introducing the New York Ag Sentinel program, which is one program within our state Eden, which is a disaster situational awareness tool for primarily the agricultural extension community, but it is also useful across other domains, as you will see. So again, my name's Keith Tidball. I'm from the Department of Natural Resources 50% of the time now, and the other 50% of the time I'm here in Extension Admin as an Assistant Director for Disaster Education. And some of you may have heard me talk about military families and veterans as well in another webinar. So let's get started. The first thing to work on is some relevance. Why would we be interested as extension in this notion of disaster and disaster education? Well, there are a number of reasons. There are a number of mandates, which we'll get to. But the first thing to keep in mind is just to recognize how much disaster is actually a part of our life here in the state of New York. We are number 4 for the number of disasters, federally declared disasters in the United States. Surprisingly, we are ahead of Florida in that regard, and we are certainly far ahead, as you can see by the graphic there, far ahead of the national average in terms of federally declared disasters. And that doesn't even count all the state and county level disasters or emergencies that get declared. So we have major impacts on a regular basis, and there has always been a role for cooperative extension since our founding to provide expertise, assistance, and so forth when disaster strikes. And now we are formalizing that in today's world where disaster seems to be more prevalent, and the intensity and frequency of especially tropical and other related storms seems to be growing. I see many of you have added to the chat box. I thank you for that, and I will keep an eye on that if there are questions. Great to see so much county representation, and also very glad to see New York City in the house. Thanks, Helen, for being here. So how does it look in terms of disasters on a county-by-county basis? Well, this is just a snapshot of disaster declarations between 2007 and 2012, just a 5-year snapshot. And you can see that in New York, if the county is white, not shaded in by a color, then it hadn't had a disaster declaration in that 5-year time period. But we know that recently we've experienced flooding all around Lake Ontario. At this time, according to my latest calculation, there is not a county on the map that hasn't had weather-related disasters in the time period of 2007 to 2017, basically the last decade. So this affects all of us, and especially the coastal communities. You see that those are shaded more dark. You're getting plenty of disaster and weather-related activity there along the coast and along the Hudson River and the Mohawk. So it's relevant in that sense. And then we have these big storms, these things that we hope only happen infrequently. Hurricane Irene basically was the reorganization of Eden in New York, shortly followed by Tropical Storm Lee, and then we had Hurricane Sandy, and we've had a number of other localized events, pop-up thunderstorms causing immense flooding in Yates County, for example, the Lake Ontario flooding of this summer, and many, many others, where our role in Extension has come to the fore in terms of disaster education in all phases of the disaster cycle.
So Keith, there's a question, was the last slide referring to federally declared disasters?
This slide is weather-related disasters on a county emergency basis. I would say, though, that there is a correlation between that statistic and this. And if somebody's interested in tracking that down further, I can certainly come up with where we derived that slide in terms of the data. I think that the declarations are county emergencies declared on the state level.
Thank you.
So let's talk a little bit about our mandate. So often we're thinking about our sort of mothership, if you will, as the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Our mandates have traditionally come from the Department of Agriculture predominantly, although other departments certainly have provided us mandates in other realms. But this mandate around extension is also coming from another department. That is the Department of Homeland Security. The mandate basically is summed up in the National Preparedness Goal, which I would encourage everyone to get a copy of. This is freely available in hard copy or as a PDF. And basically this preparedness goal established in September of 2015 is that preparedness is the shared responsibility of the entire nation, and that the goal is a secure and resilient nation with the capabilities required across the whole community, sounds like cooperative extension, to prevent, protect against, mitigate, respond to, and recover from the threats and hazards that pose the greatest risk. Please do keep in mind that the Homeland Security Department and FEMA do not have cooperative extension. So they are seeing the valuable asset that cooperative extension represents nationally and at the state level and at the county level, and are hoping that we're going to step up as we have been for example, within the Eden context or the Extension Disaster Education Network. So we have this other mandate coming from a different, somewhat unusual department, cabinet level department in our national government. And within that national preparedness goal, there are these core capabilities that we need, and it's stated in there that they are not exclusive to any single government organization, but they're required to be encapsulated by the combined efforts of the entire community. If you want to dig into this a little deeper, I have included the URL there, and this will be available to you also afterwards. But I would encourage you to take a look at this so you can kind of get the context and the broad brush mandate for why it is that cooperative extension might be involved in disaster, in all phases of disaster. So within the Department of Homeland Security and the whole FEMA universe, there is this handbook, basically the playbook, if you will, the National Incident Management System. And we're not going to get down in the weeds on that today, but suffice it to say that this management system is the way that we prepare for, prevent, and manage response to emergency and disaster situations. And it deals with the coordination of emergency response at the local, state, and federal level. So it's a flow up, flow down system with a set of standard operating procedures that are very straightforward, simple, and make a lot of sense. And that's the thing that guides our involvement with the rest of our local, state, and federal partners when a disaster strikes. Within that, NIMS, we call it, that's the acronym for that National Incident Management System, there are 15 emergency support functions. Many of them don't necessarily affect or aren't the wheelhouse, if you will, or in our lane for cooperative extension, but the ones highlighted in yellow are certainly in our wheelhouse, in our lane. ESF, Emergency Support Function 2, around communications. 11, especially agriculture and natural resources. 14, long-term community recovery, also a major area that we are involved in with cooperative extension, both nationally and at the state level, and then external affairs, which is mainly a public liaison sort of role. At the county level, you will most often find yourself working in ESF 11, ESF 2, and ESF 14 after the dust settles. So again, establishing some of the mandate and trying to understand how do we fit into this system, and these are the ways that we do. If you want to do a deeper dive on the incident management system or any of these questions regarding FEMA, Homeland Security, and what these systems look like and how they play out, I did a webinar not too long ago called Extension Disaster Competency, What You Need to Know. That's available on the Eden website. The YouTube link is there on the screen. And I would encourage you, that's about a 1-hour webinar as well. I would encourage you, if you're interested in learning about this, to check that out and then take some of the training, the freely available training that's available. And so with that, I will leave the sort of NIM system and so forth and the establishment of our mandate so that we can move into how does this actually work for us at the county level. The first thing to point out is that we have a growing set of resources, growing by the week, within the New York Extension Disaster Education Network. And the thing to remember here, folks, is that our network, our state Extension Disaster Education Network, is one state's and one land-grant university's contribution to a giant library of best management practices, evidence-based research, and extension products from the entire land-grant system with the oversight of NIFA. So this program that we're talking about today, that we're all hopefully going to use even more in our day-to-day work in the counties, it comes from NIFA through the National Land Grant and National Cooperative Extension System right down here to New York and to our counties. What I'd like to do now is just invite you to take a look at the website. You can click on that if you'd like. There's a couple of things to point out in case you haven't been here in a while. We continue to revise this website. We've maintained this sort of tile Jeopardy kind of look because it seems to be the best way to show the various baskets content-wise very quickly, especially on a phone, or if you're in a hurry and you want to find out real quick, what am I supposed to do now? For example, if you were worried about Hurricane Irma, you would click on Natural Disasters, which is the tile there, yep, that one. And you would scroll down to Hurricanes, and here you would find all kinds of different information collated from everything from national information, state level emergency management information, all the way to fact sheets that have been created by experts right here on campus, specifically dealing with things that you might want to know when you are getting ready to react to a hurricane or attempting to recover from one. And this is true of pretty much any disaster or hazard that you can think of on this website. There will be this kind of basket of resources. And the idea here is for you in the county associations to be able to take these things, either use them as is or rebrand them. It's an off-the-shelf library of information to make your job easier when you're asked these questions. Nobody expects every one of you to be experts on disaster. What we want here is this library that you can use in a moment's notice and direct people to as if it was some website you built right there in your county, and we encourage that. Another thing I'd like for you to take a look at, over on the left, you see that column. Under natural disasters, it's expanded now because that's the basket that we clicked on, or the tile. There is an item there that says CCE educators and associations towards the bottom. If you click on that one, this is where your resources for how you as a cooperative extension educator can utilize these materials. There's Eden 101, as I mentioned. There is what is extension. This is the Eden 101 that's before you now, right there briefly, was one Campus County Connection webinar that we did a couple of years ago, and this one will walk you through the basics for anybody in your association that needs that. And then there are a number of other sort of resources there, and today's Eden 201 will be posted here shortly, as well as that disaster education competency webinar I mentioned, and other resources, including some of the stuff we'll talk about here in a minute with the Ag Sentinel program. So this is your private area. This isn't password private, but this is predominantly for extension educators to be able to grab these resources quickly or to train up new staff or what have you. The last thing, if we can go back to the home screen, Celeste. The last thing to mention is that on the far left bottom, you'd have to scroll down a little bit, there are some very recent, the stuff that's cutting edge happening right now is usually underneath this section here. So we've got information about what we were up to under Ontario lake flooding and resources that were specific to that, other sort of current events. We've got the real-time disaster tracking link there that will, if you're interested in where Irma is or what it's doing, that link will help you with that. And also there's this active bulletin from the National Terrorism Advisory System that you can also access from right here, as well as our tweets. I think that's probably enough around the website, and I would encourage you to sort of noodle around there when you have the opportunity, and make sure you're familiar with it, because when the time comes, and this is the right slide to be on, when the time comes, we need to be familiar enough with these resources to be able to direct our stakeholders to them. So that's Eden, and that's the way the Extension Disaster Education Network is set up to operate on a day-to-day basis. But what we're going to transition to now is, how do you take this to the next level? What happens when there really is a disaster that we, Cooperative Extension, are going to be called upon to play some role in? What happens when we need more than a network is that we operationalize, we stand up DART. That is an acronym. DART is a program within our New York Extension Disaster Education Network, and it stands for the Disaster All Hazards Response Team. A quick history on this. This was a result of the needs that emerged after Hurricanes Irene and Lee. There was a lot of damage to Cooperative Extension assets around a number of counties. There was also quite a lot of angst and anxiety, and there were people that were unaccounted for periods of time, and there was a lot of suffering among our communities in New York. And we realized that we need to do a lot more when disaster strikes than have a website. So we under the leadership of Helene Dillard, we established the Disaster All Hazards Response Team and a standard operating procedures that Cooperative Extension Administration will execute whenever there's the threat of or the reality of a hazard or disaster affecting members of our community here in New York State. So what is that? How does that work? So what do we do when DART is activated? The first thing that I do is work with my team here to determine what the exact circumstances are, and then we quickly check in with whatever CCE admin and county association staff may be being affected and get sort of an eyes, boots on the ground understanding of what's actually happening, and also a safety check. Are staff okay? Are field folks okay? Then thirdly, we determine how able is that Cooperative Extension Association going to be to function in terms of repeating information, serving as a liaison to the local community, and so forth. Are the telecommunications available? Are vehicles still operable? Is the building still there in some cases? What kind of mobility do we have, and so forth. Once that assessment is complete, we talk to, there's a small group of us here that are part of the Disaster All Hazards Response Team, and we notify the Director of Extension, Chris, here's what we've got, and here's what we probably need to do. And that is when he makes the call to activate the Disaster All Hazards Response Team. When he activates the Disaster All Hazards Response Team, he sends out a message to the entire Cooperative Extension system. You may have seen that message, and that sets in motion a number of things that we're going to talk about here in the next couple of minutes. But what we make sure we have ready when that activation happens is a standard package of documentation that's ready to go for you, which includes technical guidelines, checklists, fact sheets, program guides, rules and procedures, and so forth, that you are free to use in whatever ways are going to best help you be visible and viable, and then be remembered as playing a significant role for your communities as Cooperative Extension. Then, finally, with DART activated under the leadership of the Director, we begin situation assessments. We have an administrative assistant here, Dina, who's excellent at this. Basically has to drop everything and turn her attention towards this disaster so that we record everything and we become basically a crisis center here on campus to work with you, the county associations, to be able to respond to these situations. So that's sort of in a nutshell the Disaster All Hazards Response Team. We're not going to spend a ton of time on this slide now, but I want you to have it. This is sort of the one-sheet version of what I just described, and who's doing what. We're going to go through this as a scenario instead of looking at all these words on this chart, but this is here for you to download, print out, or what have you, so that you have a quick reference of who's doing what when in the disaster cycle and where you might be able to play a role. So all of this content will be covered here in this next scenario that we're going to go through. I'm going to pause and ask if there are any questions up till now. If there are, go ahead and type them in, and I'm keeping an eye, as I said, on that chat box.
So while we're waiting for questions to come in, Keith, one question that I have is the checklists and all the content that will get sent out. That, I mean, I'm imagining that that's kind of all in the ready, right?
Some of it is. That's a great question. Some of that content is ready, or the skeleton of that content is ready. But what we often will do in the example of extreme flooding, we will check in with faculty experts and say, this flooding is different. This will be saltwater. And what do we need to know about how saltwater is going to affect a host of plants, soils? What are the remediation? How long are we talking about? Or we had some interesting situations after Hurricane Sandy with mold. So we had an expert deal with mold. So we try to have some stuff on hand, but there will always be stuff that we're not expecting, where we need to reach into the expertise of our land grant or even that broader national system to come up with. For example, we had a tornado threat on a fairground. We haven't had a fair get hammered by a tornado, but lots of states have, Oklahoma and others. So they have some expertise that we're able to grab real quick and spin up some fact sheets for folks on stuff like that. So it's a combination of both stuff that we have ready and stuff that we need to get ready quickly to be available to folks in the field. Not seeing any questions, so we're going to move on. Hopefully that means you're super excited and engaged. So here's our scenario. This is timely. Let's just use this hurricane idea as our example for today. So let's just imagine we're in a position where it's a beautiful fall, September day, and in the morning news, we all hear about this strong tropical depression that may hit the Northeast, kind of like the way Sandy unwound before us. And the news media is saying there's no clear consensus of this storm's track, but it's possible that New York State could take a hit. All right, so that should indicate that we need to be doing something. It certainly does here at Extension Administration. We move into what is level yellow in our sort of standard operating procedures. That's guarded. That means there are some preparatory actions that we need to be taking. And what are those? From the standpoint of what's happening on campus, you will see that we will alert the entire cooperative extension system that there might be a severe weather incident, and we're going to start providing tailored preparedness guidance. This is front-end stuff. Here's what you need to do to prepare for this. Whether it's going to be another Snowvember or a hurricane or whatnot, we're going to put out, mostly through the disaster listserv and through social media, preparedness guidance. The idea for this is that all y'all have to do is monitor those social media sites and repost, like, retweet, whatever the verbiage is for the various social media. It's already there for you, and you can put that stuff out with just a couple of clicks. That's the first thing we're going to do. The second thing, when we're in yellow, is we're going to warn members of our Eden Advisory Group, that's the team here on campus, and our director that we may have to activate the Disaster All Hazards Response Team, or DART, and so that's a warning order, basically. And then what we also do at that time is we open communications with our state partners, that's predominantly DEC, Ag and Markets, and the State Emergency Management Office, and say we're monitoring this and we're standing by to activate our Disaster All Hazards Response Team and all that means to them. And they are very, very excited about the way Eden is evolving, because they see the value in all of you out there in the counties helping with these sorts of incidents. So that's what happens here on campus when we're yellow. What happens for you? What's going on, or what should be happening there in the counties, is that you are going to determine from your local reporting and expertise and networks whether you're going to be in or near harm's way. And I would hope you would communicate that to us so we can start to work together. Then you need to assign a staff person who's going to become the county Eden point of contact for this particular incident. Now, this is often going to change because there are different staff in or out or on vacation when these things occur. So a point of contact, if you're going to be in harm's way, needs to be assigned and communicated so I know who to talk to in your county about Eden-like stuff. The next thing to do is to make sure that your county website your county cooperative extension website has some sort of a link to Eden. Many of you already do, but if it's sort of fallen down to the bottom of the list because of other activities and other priorities, you might want to push it back up when we know there's something coming in this yellow zone. And then, of course, make sure that you're connected up in social media and that your email lists are ready to serve as these sort of information repeaters. What we're trying to do is have so many nodes in this network that it's impossible for somebody not to have heard what the preparedness messages might be in yellow. Then finally, what you would all need to do out there in the county associations is to familiarize or refamiliarize yourself with the Eden website. Where are the resources that we're going to direct folks to? Make sure you can see them, that there are no broken links. If there are, please communicate them to me. And also familiarize yourself with the Ag Sentinel website. Again, that's going to be one of the last things we talk about, so that you can utilize that and serve in that capacity. So that's what happens in yellow. This is like the warning order. Looks like we may be in for a little bit of a ride. Fasten your seatbelts. Then what? Well, as what happened in Hurricane Sandy, there's lots of speculation and hand-wringing about what's going to happen, where's the path of the storm. Then we get to this point where most reliable news sources say, yep, it's going to hit New York. And all indications are that it's going to be a significant event. So we move from yellow to orange. This is that sort of elevated threat level, and now we have some other work to be doing. Here on campus, what are we going to be doing? We are going to be asking for that activation of DART from the Director of Cooperative Extension with a couple of details, so he or she knows why we're doing this and what the justification is and can get behind it. Then we activate that with our standard operating procedures, which means whoever's going to be on the team for this particular event needs to quickly refamiliarize themselves with our standard operating procedures, the playbook. And then we begin our liaison with the state agencies. And we basically get invited in to the emergency operations system as emergency support function 11 and other support. So we augment the desk in the ops room. You know, you've probably seen in the movies these Pentagon operations rooms and so forth, lots of screens and lots of bodies working hard. Well, those are real, and cooperative extension is part of that. And so we augment the ESF 11 desk with your help. And here's what you can be doing in level orange. At this time, you're going to want to notify the County Office of Emergency Management in your county that you're up for supporting them for the incident. Now, that's going to change incident by incident, depending on your staffing and what's going on, or whether you're right in harm's way and need to evacuate or what. But when you let the Office of Emergency Management know that you're up for supporting them, they're going to look to you for assistance in the areas of expertise that you have. Ag issues. This is not first responder assistance. This is expertise and technical assistance so that they know how to respond to questions that they're going to field, and that they have a hotline to some experts through you in the County Cooperative Extension Office to the Land Grant University here and even the federal system of USDA NIFA. And that's your role there as at the county liaison level. The next thing to do there is to notify your state leadership that you're up. That's us. Tell us, hey, we're good to go. We've talked to County Office of Emergency Management. They want us in the room, or no, they don't, but we're on standby, whatever your status is. And at that point, you would start reposting, sharing, retweeting all this information that should be coming in a stream. We really get active with the social media in the preparedness phase and in the orange phase for an upcoming event. The next thing to do, and this is the important thing in terms of Eden 201, is to assign your Ag Sentinel. Now, that may be the same person that you assigned as a point of contact, or it may be an additional role for somebody else in your association, perhaps an Ag educator. In case we go to level red, that Ag Sentinel is going to be called upon.
So can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
So you've mentioned social media a few times,
Mm-hmm.
and so it kind of begs the question for me, is that's the way that information will get out to associations rather than by email?
We've learned through experience that in an era of phones, smartphones and so forth, email systems go down pretty easily. But it's amazing how this works. The social media networks stay up because there's so many repeaters nationally and even internationally in servers. So we have found that the best way to stay in touch, not only with what we're doing here, but others in the disaster context, because keep in mind our social media is all linked in with our state emergency management folks, all the county emergency management folks. So all that information is scrolling there right in front of you without having to sort through emails. And it's all specific to disaster education and disaster response.
I think it's important that our staff understand that that's where information will be coming through.
We do also send out emails, but the fact sheets and the links to all the websites and all that stuff, there's no way to do that in emails without clogging everybody. That's a great question. And in other interviews or webinars and discussions that we've had on Eden, I continue to press this point, but it's even more important now as we see how things went with Hurricane Harvey, that you got to get hooked up with these social media sites in order to be able to get the guidance that you need, especially when the power goes down. And there are a number of preparedness things we in Cooperative Extension need to do to make sure our phones continue to operate after an hour or two, including having some spare batteries and so forth, but that's another webinar. Okay, so now we're in, thanks for the question. So now we're in red. This is high risk. So this thing is really happening. We're going to get hit. It's just about an hour away, and we have some stuff that we need to do. So what can you expect that we're doing here on campus? We've activated our level red standard operating procedures, which include identifying key faculty and technical experts to include on our team. Our team basically grows at this point because we know there's going to be some technical experts we want to have on hand. There's an entire function that we'll be engaged in dealing with media. The media really leans heavily on us when there's a disaster for information and expertise that they can put out to the world via television and radio. We also then dedicate that administration person, that's Dina if she's here, or her backup if she's not, which assists us with the incident reporting so that there's always a full comprehensive record of every action that we've taken and that you've taken. We get into the regular communication establishment, which means that if you're in harm's way or near harm's way, you and us, we will together decide, is this, do we need to talk every 4 hours? Do we need to talk in the morning, in the evening? How often do we need to talk? And so forth. So we'll establish that at this point. We also want to do some last minute accountability of where our people are. Does everybody have their own situation under control so that they can function in this role? And if not, then we got to focus on those issues first. We also, at this point, are going to begin to provide situation reports to Cornell University administration, not just inside our extension system, but to our colleges and all the way up to the president who's interested, president of our university, who will be interested in what we're doing. What is the outward face, our extension and outreach channel of the university up to in anticipation of and during the event. And then we begin that response phase of replying to those informational requests and technical assistance requests from managers, practitioners, and the media. And so what would you be doing? Well, we really want to know what's the status of your association staff and infrastructure. And there are other people here in Cooperative Extension Administration that also want to know that. Paul and others will want to know, is everybody okay? What are the basics in terms of what we need to know about your assets there? But in Eden here, we want to know that too, because there are things that we have a direct channel into the emergency management system and the operations center that may be helpful if needed. You would need to continue reposting and sharing and retweeting the information that's coming from headquarters here as much as possible. And so it almost takes somebody that's dedicated to monitoring these things during this period to make sure that you're retweeting or reposting or liking or recreating the post that we have as your own, which we welcome also, so that this stuff is a flow of stuff gets out there. And obviously the reason to do that is to minimize loss of life and property. It's also important to do that in hindsight because it's meaningful and matters to those that are in a position to support cooperative extension when the dust settles. Now we finally get to this thing called conducting Ag Sentinel assessments. As a result of the work that we did in the collaboration between Ag and Markets and Cooperative Extension here at Cornell, after Irene, Lee, and Sandy, it became clear that Cooperative Extension agriculture educators are probably the most informed people about what's happening in their respective communities in the agricultural domain. There was one instance I remember being in the Ops Center in Albany, and we looked over at the USDA guy who was trying to get on his computer and find out what was happening in County X and how many farms and how much milk there might be and what was going to happen if this happened. And he couldn't get the information he needed, A, because we were in a bunker, and B, because he didn't have anybody to call. I was in that bunker at the same time, was able to make one phone call to an agricultural educator in the county, and we were able to get that information immediately up to the coordinator of the entire incident. And from that point forward, there's been an investment from the state in Eden to be able to more fully utilize this asset, which is that our ag educators know what's going on. So what we ask our ag educators to do is to be the eyes and ears on the ground when there is a natural disaster or other hazard affecting the agricultural sector. What we ask is not for you to get in harm's way. We ask you to utilize your networks, open the channels and hear and report what you're hearing. The reason for doing this, and we're going to go into exactly how that reporting looks here in just a second, the reason for doing this is not so that you have what FSA is already going to do a week or two after the disaster and do the kind of assessment that indicates what sort of crop damage or crop insurance or other sort of disaster certifications are going to occur. That's not what we're doing. This real-time eyes and ears work as the Ag Sentinel is much more immediate and urgent. We want to know if within the ag and natural resources sector there are needs emerging. Farmers may call 911 and say, my cows are floating down the river, and 911 operator will say, we're sorry, we'll try to get somebody to help you as soon as possible, but right now we're saving lives. Okay, that's not exactly what the farmer wanted to hear. If that information comes through the Ag Sentinel program right up through Eden in the emergency management situation room, there may be assets that can be deployed to help that farmer out in real time rather than wait for a inevitably clogged up 911 or 911 system. So that's one reason to do it, and there are many others just in terms of where assets need to be pointed. Ag and Markets is serious and cares about being Johnny on the spot with this kind of stuff, and this is an excellent role for our ag educators to be relevant, visible, viable, and so forth in these incidents. So how does that work? This is a little small. Is there a question coming up there? No. This is a little small, but I think we can see it online. Are we able to slide that across? Yep. So this is the form that you need to know where this thing lives and be familiar enough with it to be able to use it. So we use this form. Ag educators or anybody that's assigned to be the Ag Sentinel during a disaster would use this form to get a quick snapshot of what's going on. You can see it's very straightforward. You basically are going to put your name, your contact information, where you're from, what county, and so forth in the top. You can do this online as a PDF, a writable PDF, or you can just print it out and put it on a clipboard and do it that way. But you can see it's talking about, rough numbers. This is all just sort of, windshield survey level stuff, or I was on the phone and this is what I think I know. How many farms are impacted in your county? Do you have a sense of how many livestock are either loose or stranded or injured or dead, or what's going on with them? Other livestock needs, barns. We had big barn collapses not too long ago with the snow. These forms were critical for us getting our hands around over 100 barn collapses and all the implications of that. And then, of course, field crop places to report, supplies and equipment and facilities issues, power issues, and if you scroll down a little further, Celeste, you'll see that on the back page, there's some final contact information and types of needs. Now, this stuff goes directly through here and gets on one of those screens very quickly. And one of the ways it does that is through this heads-up dashboard that Ag and Markets generously gave us a grant to create. So we have this here in our New York Eden Disaster All Hazards Response Team Ag Sentinel program. We have this heads-up dashboard that is available for those working in the Emergency Management Operations Center to look at, and it's you that are populating the data for that heads-up system. If we go to the next slide.
Just a quick question. So is this a fillable PDF? How does this get entered in, especially if somebody is without power?
So if you're without power, this thing is designed so that if you print it, hopefully you can print it. If you print it, you should be able to write whatever needs to be written on it and take a photograph of it with your smartphone and send it to me. And we can. Now, ideally, you would be able to use your laptop or something and use the PDF fillable version. Or if you're just looking at it, you can simply leave me a voicemail and say, here's the stuff, and then I can check the boxes from you.
Okay.
And if you want, you can take some photographs and include them, and I'll give you an example of how that was helpful in real time. So in the next slide, this is where this information actually goes. So this is the Ag Sentinel dashboard. There's a question.
Yeah, is this count for the total area, not for individual contacts I've made with the producers?
It can be both. Ideally, at some point, you're going to get a handle on, in the county, there is this much going on. There are these 5 or 6 or 10 or however many farms affected, and this is the sort of aggregate number. But those reports, we fully expect, aren't going to be complete. They're going to trickle in hour by hour or day by day with more information, new information, and we continue to compile that here. We want this to be super user-friendly for you. Just keep pushing the information our way, and it'll come together. It get pulled together basically in the Ops Center.
That was a thank you.
Okay, cool.
Mm-hmm.
So let's just take a look here. This screen that's before you now was the April flooding in the North Country back in 2014. You can see that, and I wish I could scroll through this. I forgot to get a password for this computer that I'm doing this webinar on. I would take you to this live. But anyway, we can see a snapshot. This dashboard has every single county. On the left, you can see that there's the county seal. If you click on that, if you're really in the dashboard, you can't now, apologies. If you were to click on that, that would pull up the USDA Ag Census data for that county. So very quickly in the Emergency Operations Center in Albany, we can see exactly what's going on, roughly. I mean, the Ag Census doesn't have everything, but it's a good snapshot of what's going on in County X. In this particular case, during this April flooding incident, we had county declarations declared in Herkimer, Jefferson, Lewis, and a few others. And so when they get declared, they go red. So we know we can quickly scroll through all the counties and look at the ones that are highlighted red. And then there's these assessment statements in there. So in Lewis County, for example, it says, in touch with farmers, distributing Eden info to radio, website, other media, the county manager's putting out information. The challenge is moving farmers, especially animals. Flooding for farmers was worse than they thought would be. At this point, it's about cleanup, yada, yada, yada. And if you see over there on the right, those are pictures that were uploaded to this site by the ag educator and by the executive director there in Lewis County in real time. So we're sitting around in the Ops Center in Albany wondering how things are going, and suddenly we know in real time, thanks to Cooperative Extension. There's no other way that information would have been in that Operations Center. And I applaud those of you on this call who've already been engaged in this, and also encourage and applaud those of you who will, because this is really helpful. These farmers, when they experience this kind of nimble, adaptive response, they're very excited and quite grateful. And in the past couple of years, for pretty much every disaster, Cooperative Extension, get a standing ovation in the House there in Albany, and they send a nice letter to our director about how Cooperative Extension helped. So
when this information gets here by somebody filling out that form and sending it to you, or
that's right,
sending you a text message or something.
That's right. Somehow or other, the information comes here to our disaster all hazards response team, me and the group, which we stand up and we put out the information. Here's the email address for all this stuff regarding this disaster. It gets to us in whatever form you can get it to us, and we will make sure it gets into the dashboard. Ideally, you're going to all have access now to the form, and you'll have, when you ask for it, you will get access to this dashboard and be able to input things yourself, assuming you have power and access to the internet. Are there questions on the Ag Sentinel dashboard? Thank you, Bonnie, for your question. All right, I'm going to move on. If there are questions, I'll be watching. There's one.
We have to ask permission for the dashboard, so that was
good question. So keep in mind, this is the space that these data, this information is in. This is a secure area. This doesn't necessarily have to be about a hurricane. This could be a terrorist attack. It could be a nuclear issue. It could be any number of hazards. So it's a secure environment, but more importantly, and ag educators will appreciate this, OPSEC, operational security. This is our job in Cooperative Extension to make sure that we don't betray the trust of our agricultural community. And you will see that many farmers are going to be reluctant to share their trouble they're having. Let's just say somebody's manure lagoon is being completely overtopped and is flooding into everybody's favorite trout stream. They're going to be pretty reluctant to give you details on that unless you can assure them that this is all password protected information. This is not for the public domain. So we are encouraging you, as you think through this, to make sure that you understand that this is a secure channel and that everything that we do will be done in a way that is password protected and requires this VPN if you're going to access the dashboard itself remotely. If we're going to take photographs of things and send them to me, then we have to be able to give the assurances to the ag producers on the ground that we are taking care of these data. This is not media. This is confidential information. So that's a great question that you asked there about permission, and that's the answer for why. And that's a very important thing for us to keep in mind. And there are also other confidentiality things, even if it's not about agriculture, if it's about a loss of property or even, unfortunately, we deal with loss of life sometimes. Those are not things we want people publicly being able to access. So password protected.
If an educator wanted access or needed access, what's the procedure?
The procedure right now is that, and this is sort of getting towards the conclusion.
Sorry.
No, you're right on it. In fact, there we go.
There you go.
You're right on time. So the procedure is to establish in your county who is on a day-to-day basis going to be your point of contact for Eden. So what does that point of contact need? That person needs to know all the social media and what's going on in the day-to-day. They also need to be well enough informed about what happens and what's expected of them during a disaster all hazards response team activation. What are we doing? And then they will, when they're acknowledged as, thank you, you are the point of contact in County X, you get your password. Gotcha. And if that point of contact can't be the Ag Sentinel during a particular disaster, during yellow or orange, it's when we need to make sure they do get a password and that they're ready to go in the event that we reach red. All part of the standard operating procedure, which is a very boring manual, but all those procedures are in there if anybody's interested in looking at them. So I want to make sure and leave time for people to ask questions or discuss how this might work or give me for instances. I do want to make sure that you know that there is this disaster listserv. I would encourage you to sign up for it. This is one of the other places where a lot of information is put out, but I will tell you that on the disaster listserv, the mission there is to put out information for the educator audience. So we're not putting out hourly emails on the disaster list about how to prepare for the storm. We're putting out maybe once or twice a week information about important webinars or other educational resources for you to be able to utilize in this particular context or role that you may take on. There is this disaster@cornell.edu email. That email is relatively dormant until we stand up DART, and then that thing is the way we all communicate to the same group of people. The most active space for us at this time is our Twitter account. We have found that is the best way to communicate immediate messages, whether those are evacuation orders or preparedness guidance or whatnot. The Twitter account is definitely the most active. It has been the case in the past where anything we post on Twitter automatically posts on our Facebook page as well, so it's just basically a mirror. For some reason that has been broken, but I had a meeting this morning, and hopefully by the end of this week that'll be fixed up. There will probably be a different Facebook address, be advised. And then finally, as I introduced you before, there's the New York Eden website, which I encourage you to take advantage of. And the thing that I want to reiterate, this is a state program for you. Every item on that website and these things are meant for you to be able to take off the shelf and put them out there without having to do a lot of work, but get lots of credit. At the end of the day, this should be easy stuff for people to be able to take a role in disaster education, response, recovery, all phases of the disaster, all of which matters to our clientele, our stakeholders, and we want to make it easy for you to do it. If there are suggestions or other sorts of programs that you want or need to make this even easier for you to do, please send them to us. We want to make sure and be adapting to whatever those needs are. From there, I will open it up to questions from you. I hope there are some, and if there aren't any, there's no pressure, but I thank you all for your interest and attention in Eden 201. What you can expect is that there will be even more opportunities for training. If you go on that Eden website and you look on the training link, you will find that our national Eden has developed great online training packages in preparedness, in ag security, in all kinds of other financial readiness for disaster. All these packages are ready for you to take yourselves or to offer among your communities there in your counties.
And those are through e-extension, is that correct?
Well, they are hosted on both. They're linked from the New York Eden site to the national site. So if you click on those things, you'll end up on the national Eden site. And then yes, many of those are somehow involved in e-extension.
Okay, just asking in case, I mean, sometimes you end up on you click on a link.
Yes.
And how did I get here?
Good point. So many of those things, especially the bigger ones that take a lot of bandwidth, will be hosted on e-extension. So you may need a password for e-extension as well.
Gotcha. So another question that came in was about point of contact for the Ag Sentinel. Can there be more than one point of contact for a county?
Absolutely, there can be more than one or two or more than three that are up to speed and trained. I guess during an incident, we're going to want a single point of contact just to make things work. But if you have 2 or 3 people that you want to be ready to take that job during an incident, then we'll put them all in as points of contact on paper. But just do keep in mind, if you do that, and that's great, I love it. If you do that, when we have an incident, when we get to about level orange, somebody will need to make the decision about who's the point, who's the one person that I'm talking to in that county.
Okay. So a little more further clarification on that. Do the requests for that point of contact have to come from an executive director? Or do they come from anyone in the county? Do you have a preference?
We don't have a rule about that. The history on this has been that it's the executive director that's making a decision about staffing. And the reality is, for all of us, when a disaster strikes, it's drop everything. So there are real staffing implications. We understand that. But what we've learned is that it's worth it to drop everything for a lot of reasons. So having it in your mind, all right, who's going to do what when we have to drop everything, generally that should be the ED's call. But if the executive director says, look, you're going to be in charge of this, it's going to be your call, that's fine too. I just need to know that so I don't step in hot water myself.
Right. And how about regional ag specialists? How do the ag teams work?
The ag teams have informally been super helpful and responsive, and their social media is very active in repeating some of the information that we put out there. We have not formalized a role yet or points of contact because, again, it depends on who's where and what's on at that time. If you're in the middle of a big harvest issue somewhere in Western New York and there's activities happening somewhere else, then it's hard to know in advance who's going to be available. But an item on my to-do list is working with our leadership here in Cooperative Extension Administration to try to formalize what the relationship between those teams and Eden needs to be in a time of disaster.
Thank you.
You got something on my to-do list. Any other questions?
All right, well, we're waiting for questions. I am just going to bring up a different web page. So I just want to thank folks for participating in the Campus County Connection webinar series. We typically hold one of these per month, sometimes more, depending on what else is going on. So I'm going to just bring up a staff site. I think all of you know that staff site staff.cce.cornell.edu has this list of upcoming webinars and events. You've probably been receiving the Extension Insider now, which periodically comes out as a newsletter, and like every other week when it's not a newsletter, it's just a list of dates. And we have been using that to primarily promote the list of dates to promote the Campus County Connection webinar series. So you will see some of those on that list. I encourage you to sign up. Sign up this year is not on a form, but it is instead directly on Zoom. It just makes it a little bit easier. So the upcoming list right now is on the Campus County Connections page. All of the recorded webinars are posted here as well. And if you have trouble finding anything, just reach out to me.
There's a question there, Celeste, that I want to address before we call it quits. Let's see, it's
from Carrie. If it makes sense,
Carrie.
Can you walk through the red phase from the educator perspective? where would they be? What would they be doing?
Okay, so if we can get the presentation back up, we'll go to the appropriate slide. Great question. Red phase. So I think you probably understand, Carrie, what we're supposed to be doing here on campus. Your question is more, what is the association supposed to be doing, or the point of contact for Eden and or Ag Sentinel during red? So basically, let's boil this down beyond those 3 points. What generally happens is I establish phone / text / Facebook Messenger, whatever, contact with my point of contact or contacts, and in the case of Sandy, there was 12 or 13 counties for a while there. And we stay in constant contact so that I can create situation reports that go to my team here on campus and are pushed up through that Ag Sentinel and other channels through the emergency management system. But more importantly, I think for you in the county is that this is your lifeline to resources that you see that are going to be needed. It puts you in a position, that constant contact, it puts you in a position to be a broker of good news during disaster. You as Cooperative Extension have always been, for the 100 years of our existence, those good guys and good gals who have the ability to bring resources to bear on challenges that people are facing. It's especially important to be able to be that person or serve that role during a disaster. So partly what your role is to just stay in touch and report on what's going on, and also be a repeater of information that's coming from the top down. So you're that warm handshake between the local community and the state, well, the local, state, and federal emergency response community. We're not playing first responder roles, we're playing support roles, and those support roles are really important. It's support networks that generally tend to break down during a disaster. And Cooperative Extension is a very, very strong network, deep ties into the communities, and tends to be very robust and resilient during these times. So in addition to that sort of constant contact, communicating, you in the counties will often begin to get an influx of media attention. And then, sometime when the transition happens between response and recovery, local legislators and other are going to want to come up with meetings, and they're going to want to do public things, and generally the Secretary of Agriculture or the Commissioner of Agriculture is going to show up and want to tour your damage site. There's all kinds of pitfalls and, oh my goodness, what am I supposed to do now sorts of moments that are going to happen to you out there, where we've done this a lot. So we end up switching roles somewhere about that response to recovery transition zone, where we're now in a position where we're not asking you for tons of information. Now we're providing you with guidance and support on, okay, so here's what you need to do to field the Ag Commissioner, here's your talking points, here's the fact sheets that we're going to spin up for you to have a nice package of materials to put out at your next county meeting or what have you. So it ends up being a special, temporary, meaning days, weeks, or even months, special relationship between your association and Eden, and therefore central administration here, regarding all of those issues around how you're going to be central as a support mechanism for the disaster response and recovery. Does that help, Carrie?
She says, thank you. Yeah, I think some of it is knowing what drop everything, you know what I mean? Like, what does that mean, and how does that play out? And certainly there's even some staff that have been on the webinar this morning that have lived that out, and certainly you have as well.
And honestly, on first blush, I know a lot of people, and I've experienced this. I've been doing this now for about 10 years of the 15 that I've been here at Cornell. About 10 of it's been working with Eden. So I know that on first blush, a lot of people are like, no way, I'm not doing this. This isn't what I get paid to do. I'm going to lock the door and go home and be safe with my family. And that's fine. And some people will have that response. But many people, even those that have had that response historically, when disaster hits their county and it's their folks that need the assistance and it's their opportunity to get out in front of this, man, people have really, really stepped up. And once they have, I've seen that once a county's experienced this and seen how the Extension Disaster Education Network can help them in their efforts, not only in the disaster, but later in terms of the visibility and viability of their association, it's a conversion experience. And so after that, it's not so hard to imagine that you're going to drop everything. If you're skeptical about this, I can put you in touch with folks that have experienced this in many, many counties now, since we've been active with this. And if you're on the fence, I would just ask you to take my word for it. When cooperative extension can be that visible and that viable and that remarkable in times when people are really hurting, it definitely helps when it comes time to make sure that you have the financial and other support you need in your community.
Well, that's a great end to a really wonderful webinar. Thank you so much for being here, Keith, and thanks for all of you for being on. We are going to wrap up this episode of Campus County Connections, and I hope you'll join us again. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.